Hi everyone and welcome to the Course Correct podcast. If you're new here, my name is Amogh and I'm a would-be MBA student. I will be joining the Indian School of Business this year and I want to revolutionize the way you think about your careers. This episode is part of a season on anchor subjects, where we take a journey through a subject, explore all the possible career options and how to get there. The playlist for the anchor subject season is in the top right hand corner right now. Please click it if you want more information. This episode, we're going to be focusing on history. I'm going to be telling you why history is so great, why you should be excited about a history-centric career, my top 10 list of careers that have history as their focal point, a couple of unconventional careers that you didn't even realize had history at its center, and what you can do starting today to get your interest and passion for history bubbling up again. I've included timestamps for all of these in the show notes as well as in this video, so you can feel free to skip around as you feel like it. For now, let's get started. So, why is history so great? I mean, people live in the present and they constantly can't stop worrying about the future. I mean, there are pressing demands right now in the present, and there are so many things to be thought about so that the future will be better than the present itself. In all of that chaos and all of that pandemonium, why bother with thinking about what has been? Why do we continue to stress history onto our students and our professionals when there are so many more, quote unquote, more important things to deal with? I think I can come up with a few reasons. Here's reason number one, and I think this is one of the most important. History empowers us to understand our past and therefore to better conceptualize our present. They say history repeats itself. All of us have heard that. But if we understand the successes and failures of our past, then in an ideal world, we would be able to learn from our mistakes and to make sure that none of the mistakes that we have made in the past as a society will ever happen again. Let me give you an example. Let me ask you something. All of us agree that what happened in Germany in the 1930s was bad. I mean, it was horrendous. It was, in terms of the failures of humanity, it ranks in the top 5. And that is a tough list to crack. It does. But what are we talking about? What exactly went wrong? How could we exactly fix it? What exactly did we do wrong? What was our failure exactly? And how can we make sure that it won't happen in the future? How do we know that the seeds aren't already being sown for something like that to come back in the future? What about slavery? How do you know what exactly caused slavery? How can you make sure that it never happens again? Do you know that? There's a lot to be learned. History is the only place where you can learn something like this. And that's why history is so great. So history tells us how to avoid the mistakes of the past, and history also tells us about the successes of the past so that we can celebrate it. And that is great. But history does so much more. History shows us and enables us to see a long-term behavioral pattern in people and societies that cannot be seen in any other discipline. Think about it. There are long-term trends, long-term trends that will show no discernible pattern in yours and my puny 80 to 90 year lifespan. We will never be able to see it coming. Large tectonic cultural shifts, the birth and death of religions and beliefs and civilization, huge ungodly technological innovation that went at a snail's pace but over the eons has become completely, amazingly, breathtakingly impactful. Apart from that, there are many other long-term trends that you and I will never be able to see coming. We have to stand on the shoulders of giants and read history in order to understand it. Let me give you a few more examples. Here are a couple of things that history was able to teach us and no other discipline apart from history could have gotten right. The first is cultural trends. The world and the trend towards globalization could only have been seen by examining hundreds and hundreds of years of history. And we couldn't have done it if we just were talking about the last 10 or the last 20 or the last 30 years. Yes, we are talking about globalization more importantly and more significantly in the last 20 to 30 years. However, the trend towards modernization and the long-term cultural shifts because of that can only be studied for the last hundreds and hundreds of years, which can only be done through history. Here's another one. There was a global trend in the 18th and 19th century towards nihilism. There is no other way that we can figure out the global trend towards nihilism unless we would have studied the cultures of the world. I mean, yes, Friedrich Nietzsche had predicted the death of God, psychologically speaking, and had predicted what would happen after. Once the death of God had occurred, then society would either descend into nihilism or go into hardcore totalitarianism, or they would make up their own values. These were the three things predicted, and we have seen all three of them manifest in the 20th and the 21st century. The only way that we could have studied the predictions and understood the long-term cultural trend of descending into nihilism or making up our own values or even hardcore totalitarianism and Nietzsche's prediction only by studying history, only by understanding what happened and when and how could we really examine the why truly well. That is what history can do. We also use history to examine long-term economic trends like the rise of capitalism. The rise of capitalism and its causes can truly be understood over a hundreds and hundreds of year horizon. You can't do it in yours and my lifetime. So you have to see history in order to get there. Another example is the changes in economic structures and power structures when the Silk Route was formed. When the Silk Route was first formed, the changes in economies and the changes in wealth that happened in the Arabian Peninsula was gargantuan. You need to know how the economies changed so that whenever a new route or whenever a new way or a new logistical phenomena is happening and that promises something as amazing as the Silk Route, we need to know what to expect. The only way that we would know that is if you examine what happened and the economy changes that happened during the Silk Route formation. Here's another one, political trends. Long-term political trends, like the rise and the ultimate fall of monarchy. There was a time when monarchy was everywhere. Now, apart from a few notable exceptions, monarchy is all but dead. How did it happen? How did it fall? How did it rise in the first place? How about the formation and the promulgation of democracy? How did democracy finally start? Where was it born? Where was it conceived? And how did it promulgate to all of the world? We need to know that. There are also the world wars, the history of colonization. These are very important things and these are very important facts and truths that need to be shown and heard and documented and kept alive in the hearts and minds of people until times immemorial. We need to do this, and history is the only way that we can get there. And last but certainly not the least, social trends. There are so many long-term social trends that can only be understood through the eyes of history. The rise and fall of the blue-collar worker, something that happened in the 20th century but had laid its seeds in the 19th century, can only be understood through history. How about the rise of the information age that was fully conceptualized and executed because of the internet? Let's say you're in 2100. Wouldn't you like to know what kind of changes were shown and evolved and sown and reaped because of the internet? How civilization changed, how people changed, how society changed, how economic and political power structure changed because of the internet. The only way that we will find all of that out is by making sure that we are keeping catalogs, keeping documentation throughout our time and are analyzing it in 2100. That is the only way that we can get there, and that is only possible through history. And that is why history is so great. And it's not just about cataloging and documenting everything. Once you are actually finished with your analysis, you get paradigm shifting, earth-shattering results. Let me give you an example. About in the late 1990s, it was found that the New York Police Department was seeing a shift in crime. What they were seeing was that crime went down by close to 50% without actually making any appreciable changes in police force or police training or policy decisions or anything like that. There wasn't really that much of a change that was happening, but then New York crime was just dropping and dropping and dropping. No one knew why. Here is what Freakonomics authors Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner came up with. They traced it back to one decision. A decision that was taken in 1982 in a Roe v. Wade case in the United States. Here is what the Roe v. Wade case made. The Roe v. Wade case legalized abortion. That's what happened. So there was something to be said for all of the children that would have been born after 1982 who would have maybe gone to a life of crime, were never born. And the crime dropped in New York as a result. It was put inside a multivariate analysis and it came up that this was one of the really key factors because of which the crime had gone down. Of course, the only reason the crime had gone down was not because abortion was made legal. It was one of many variables, but it was a key variable that was missing. And that variable was now modeled in, and now people know it is because of the legalization of abortion that crime went down. That was one of the key reasons why crime went down. And it could only have been done by keeping records and having that history available to you. That is what we can do when we have regular access to something like this. Here is another weird thing about history. The stories keep the facts alive, right? It is not that we just remember the facts and remember the chronology and that is what it was. It is that the stories really keep the facts alive. It is awesome the things that we are capable of. Think about Alexander the Great and his run through civilization and making sure that he conquered most of it. Think about Genghis Khan. It is said that when the Mongols were actually conquering, they killed so many people that the carbon footprint of the world actually went down by 700 million tons. You know how much 700 million tons is? It is about the global consumption of petrol every year. That's how big it is. Genghis Khan actually helped fight climate change, and you know how he did it? By killing that many people. Here is another example, Athenian democracy. Now, Athenian democracy is widely considered to be the prototype of all democracies all across the world right now. However, there is one thing that we always miss. Athenian democracy was only functioning because of the slave economy on which it was built. We don't actually know too much about the slave economy. Let me put it to you this way. We know less about the slave economy on which Athenian democracy was built than Athenian democracy itself. I feel like we should know about the same, don't you? It's important. The story should keep the facts alive, and now we are trying to find out about the slave economy more than we want to find out about Athenian democracy, and that is great. We need to know, and the only way that the facts will be stored in people's memories for longer and longer and longer is with the stories. And that is great about history. The stories keep the facts alive. Here's another reason. History teaches by example. Now we all know that history teaches us what we should or shouldn't do. It teaches us about our successes and our failures and all of that. But who decides if something was a success or a failure? Us. We decide. Us today, in the future, with hindsight being 2020, we decide whether something was a success or whether it was a failure. Therefore, by definition, history shows a mirror to us. It shows us what we are capable of. It shows us all of the things that we have done in the past, and it shows us all the disastrous consequences of all of our mistakes throughout time, not by teaching it to us, but actually showing us the mirror. And apart from that, it actually is an avenue for contemplation of what we believe in from a moral standpoint. That is what history can do for you. And here is the final reason, and I think this is by far the most important. At its best, history provides culture cataloging. It provides identity to people who spend their entire lives fighting for it. People live and people die. They spend their entire lives fighting for and striving for freedom, and sometimes the only solace they have is history will remember me well. Through telling your story and the story of your people and including yourselves in that huge tapestry culture catalog, you are cementing a life and a place for yourself in the future, and you're finding a lot of people coming back and finding out where they belong because you told their story as well. A classic example is hip hop. When NWA first came out, what was it? It was a cutting edge hip hop band that were spitting out lyrics that were great and amazing and no one could match them. What is it now? It's a history lesson. It's a history lesson of how black people were treated in that time. The only way they could do it was through this act of culture cataloging. You know how people say, I want to leave a mark on history? This is where that mark is going to be. This huge tapestry of a culture catalog. This is a place where all of these people who want to do all of these marvelous and amazing things will want and strive for a page or a paragraph or a footnote even, or just a pen nib of a mark on history that they did because they were so amazing that it left a mark on the tapestry of the culture catalog. That is what history is in its best and its truest form. History is awesome. Alright then, here is my top 10 list of history related careers. Now disclaimer, this is my top 10 list. I have understood it, I have gathered my data, I have done my research, and it is my opinion that these careers give you the best touchpoint to history. But I could be wrong. Please put it down in the comments if you think I've missed something. But do your own research. Understand more about the careers that I'm putting forth in front of you. I want you to do your own research and come to me with these questions so that we can take the conversation forward. Having said that, let's get going. Number 1, paleontologist. Do you like dinosaurs? Good. I think you should be in paleontology. Paleontology is a branch of history that is solely dedicated to the study of dinosaurs. You will take apart fossils, you will find fossils in archaeological digs all over the world, analyze them, find patterns in the dinosaurs of that time to understand our evolutionary past, to understand the kind of life that existed 75, 80, 100 million years ago, and try to make patterns across that amount of time. There is nothing that can be done in that stretch of time that paleontologists can't do. The kind of work that they're doing is really at the forefront of trying to find out our evolutionary past and understanding much more about ourselves. And dinosaurs, of course. If you love dinosaurs, this is really the best place for you. I would strongly urge you to take a look at it. Number 2, archaeologist. Now this is a very interesting one. If you're really interested in history, do you want to spend your life digging up fossils? I mean, archaeology is not exactly this. But it is about digging up fossils. It is the science and art of unearthing, restoring, and maintaining the fossils at your department and using them and analyzing them to find more things about the world and about the universe and about those creatures themselves and therefore about our evolutionary past. The actual act of digging up these fossils is probably the most fun that an archaeologist can have on a particular day. I think this is a great career path if you are interested in adventure, if you're interested in going forth and doing some digs in a lot of different places and finding some great interesting insights of our evolutionary past. I would strongly urge you to take a look at it. Number 3, anthropologist. Now, anthropology sits at the border of history and sociology. Through its different disciplines, anthropologists are basically studying all about humans and human cultures and societies all over the world. They have been studying different civilizations, figuring out our evolutionary history. Actually, one of the foremost places where the battle between nature and nurture is being fought is in the anthropology departments. A lot of these places are trying to understand how much of our behavior is just encoded in our genes and how much is part of our conditioning. Can you imagine how amazing that question must be to solve? Do you want to be a part of solving that question? Then anthropology might be for you. Number 4, museum conservator or curator. Now, There are huge museums all over the world that are storing the most precious things of mankind. But why are they precious? What is so precious about them? You know what it is? Actually, the weight of history that falls on those precious things is what makes them so precious. That is why someone who's interested and passionate about history has a perfect place in a museum, right? If you want to be a museum conservator, do you want to be a museum curator? Do you want to work in a museum and spend your days teaching people and helping people understand the significance and the beauty and the grandeur of all of these amazing pieces of art or fossils or something like that that exists in your museum, and spend your life as an educator and as a researcher? Is that something that excites you? Then take a look at some jobs that start and end with museums. Number 5, a civil servant. Now you might find it weird that I spoke about civil servant and history, but a lot of UPSC students end up being history graduates. It is interesting that a lot of people who study history end up being a civil servant. They might even have a unique way of looking at the world that might be perfect for them being a civil servant. Whenever a policy decision has to be made, whenever you have to execute something, it is important to figure out the weight of history that comes on you. It is important to have a historical view of the world and a historical view of your constituency and the city that you're trying to serve. And therefore, history graduates have a unique place to be great civil servants. You might be astonished as to how much of your history prowess you will use every day in your civil service. I would strongly urge that you take a look at how you can be a civil servant and where history actually gets used there. Number 6, writing. Now, here you could be a writer, you could be an editor, you could be a journalist. There are a couple of careers that you could choose from, but the point is history gives you an interesting edge. Now, there are journalists, of course, that are talking about current affairs, and that is their job and that's how it works. However, there are also this other breed of journalists that are called investigative journalists. Investigative journalists use the tools that are tailor-made for history graduates. The kind of analyses that history graduates are doing, the kind of work that history graduates are doing are perfect for journalism candidates. If you're looking for a career in writing or editing or journalism, then having a passion and interest for history actually will come in very, very handy for you. If you're into history, I would genuinely take a look at investigative journalism and see where that takes you. It's an interesting career to look up, and I would strongly urge you to do it. Number 7, archivist. Now, if you're a history graduate, actually, you probably have a job for yourself in one of these places. These are India's most iconic libraries. And the only reason that you could be there is because you have a background in history, maybe even in book conservation, and the idea is that you would be uniquely placed to work in these iconic libraries and help in the documentation, cataloging, and the maintenance of the culture catalog of India itself. Where do you think the culture catalog of India is being maintained? It's being maintained in 2 places. It's being maintained in these iconic libraries, and it is being maintained on the internet. There are these 2 places. You can work in either. In my opinion, you might be very, very interested in working at an iconic library of India, and I would strongly urge you to take a look into it. It could be a lot of fun. Number 8, a philosophy or a religions expert. Now, there are a lot of different places where anthropology comes into play, but this is probably the most important. Yes, you can be an anthropologist. However, you could probably make a little bit of a departure from it and become an expert on the world's religions, on the world's beliefs, even India's religions and India's beliefs. There are a lot of places, especially universities, where this knowledge needs to be catalogued and documented. A place in India's best universities awaits you if you have a degree either in anthropology or in philosophy, but you're focusing on India's religions or the world's religions or the world's beliefs and how they have been affected by cultural trends and philosophical trends and social trends and economic trends. It is an amazingly complex subject, and we are looking for researchers to dig deep, it is a great place to start and a great place to be. Please, I would strongly urge you to take a look into it, and it might be the great thing on your journey to be a history buff all your life. Number 9, working for a think tank. Now you're analyzing cultural trends and economic trends and social trends and political trends. Why not analyze investment trends? You might be doing long-term research on what kind of investment opportunities are best for a particular think tank. You might also be trying to figure out a lot of different interesting policy problems and figuring out what kind of changes were brought on by changes in policy in the super long term. It can only be done by a history graduate, and they will need your expertise depending on the think tank that you work at. Also, have I mentioned it's super lucrative? I would genuinely take a look into this, because if you are hired by the right think tank, you will do work that is probably some of the most impactful and most comprehensive work on law and historical law, and public policy decisions will be shaped because of your work. It is an incredible opportunity, and I would strongly urge you to take a look into it. And finally, number 10, a college professor or a teacher. Again, in my opinion, this is probably the most important thing you can do with a history degree. Now, you don't necessarily have to be a history professor. You could be a paleontology professor, you could be an anthropology professor, you could be a cultural studies professor, you could be a political science professor. The point is that you will be able to really educate the next generation and make a great amount of difference because of your history knowledge. You will really be able to make a difference in the lives of these children and birth the next generation of leaders because of your insight into history and how much you have been able to impart in your efforts as a teacher. I think it is one of the noblest professions out there, and I genuinely think if you have a passion for it, then you could be the greatest influence for an entire generation of students just by being very, very, very good at your job. A teacher or a professor, look into it. And that's it. That's my top 10 list. On to the next thing. This next section I like to call, I can do that. This is a list of unconventional careers that even you didn't realize had history at their center. Here's the first one, an art critic for a private collector. I mean, yes, you can study history, but you can also study art history. Art history is slightly different, and it leads to this engaging, interesting career. Do you want to be an art critic for a private collector? A private collector who has the money and is not looking at art for its beauty, but for its investment value. Can you look at art and artists in that particular way? Can you look at art and tell your patron, you should buy this artist's art because it's going to appreciate in the next 5 or 10 years. This art is going to be more important. This artist is not going to be as important. Will you be able to make those investment decisions for your patron just by being a good critic and a good disciple and good student of art? Do you have that in you? Take a look into it. I've put a link down in the description. I hope it'll be helpful. Here's another career that you can think about. Actually, it's less of a career, more of a side hustle. History buffs or anthropology buffs or sociology buffs, what have you, are required in the damnedest of places. Now, here's an example. If you're making a TV show or a film about the life of Shivaji Maharaj, you know who you would want in that room? I'll tell you who you would want. Baba Saheb Purandare, the foremost historian of Shivaji Maharaj in all of India. There are these consultant roles that are available for historians in the entertainment industry because all of the entertainment industry is trying to get their history right. There are historians that a significant chunk of their time goes in just consulting for the entertainment industry. You could be one of these journalists. If you're a history buff, if you're a history graduate, I would strongly urge you to take a look into it. Not only that, maybe in the editor and journalist and writer thing that I mentioned earlier, maybe you could be one of the writers here simply because you're a history buff. That is why maybe they would want you there. It's a side hustle, but it's worth considering. And that is my spiel about history. Do you like it? Good. Now, what can you do starting today to ignite your passion for history all over again? I have 3 things for you as usual: read, watch and listen. Let's start with the read. I have 3 books for you. I've put them all in the description below. First is Sapiens, second is India After Gandhi, and the third is India After and Before Independence. These are 3 books, or 4 maybe, that you will find in the description below, and I think they are a great primer to get your interest and passion for history flowing again. These books will really transport you into a place where there were so many stories being told in these times that are simply forgotten because no one has bothered to tell them well enough. These people tell them well enough. That is what you should know about these people, and you should know all of the amazing people that were alive and did amazing things so that you and I could have the life that we have right now. Also, you can obviously read these books, but you can also listen to them. Audible is a great way of listening to books that you're really not interested to read, but you're very keen on listening. Me personally, I always understand much better when I'm listening rather than reading. Buying the book on Audible obviously works out much cheaper than actually buying the book in person, and you get all the insights in a way that you can consume the book. I cannot recommend Audible highly enough. I cannot recommend audiobooks highly enough. I strongly suggest you take a look at it, and when you're there, could you tell them that I sent you? If you do, maybe they'll sponsor next season. I mean, it's worth a shot. Number 2, watch. Now this is a fairly obvious one, the documentaries. I want you to watch all the documentaries ever. There are World War II documentaries out there, there are World War I documentaries out there, there are documentaries about the greatest personalities in all of the world. They're on Netflix, they're on Hotstar, they're on Prime, they're on TV, for God's sake. Watch them. Watch all of them. Get your passion ignited immediately. And here is the third one. Listen. Dan Carlin's podcast. I've put it down in the description below. Dan Carlin's podcast. It is an incredible podcast about American history. There are some amazing snippets of world history in there as well that I think will really get you on the right path to understanding where historians and history comes from and where all of the amazing cataloging of history is done and where it comes in useful. I would strongly suggest that you subscribe to Dan Carlin's podcast and start listening immediately. And that's it. That is the history episode. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you think I've missed something, please leave it down in the comments or feel free to DM me. I'm happy to address it. Please leave a like. If you really genuinely like this video, please share this video with your friends. Each individual share helps. I want to get this message out, and I want to make sure that people choose their careers because of their liking and because of what they're good at, not just because people are telling them how to get there. Now, please feel free to subscribe to this channel as well. I want to make sure that you get all the greatest information and as quickly as you can. So every subscribe will make sure that you get all of the information at the right time and the moment I drop a video. So that will help as well. Thank you very much once again for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.